Hello, my name is Michael Driscoll, and in this tutorial you will be learning about Python comprehensions. Alright, so Python supports a shorthand method for creating lists, dictionaries, and sets that they call comprehensions. A common use case is that you want to create a new list where each element has had some kind of operation done to it. For example, you might have a list of numbers and you want to create a new list with all the numbers doubled. You could use a comprehension to accomplish this task. In this tutorial, you're going to learn how to do that with list comprehensions. You'll also learn a little bit about how to create a dictionary comprehension, and we'll wrap up the tutorial by learning about set comprehensions. Okay, so a list comprehension allows you to create a list from another sequence, such as a list or dictionary. You end up using list-like syntax with a for loop on a single line. The syntax goes off of a list comprehension. The syntax of a list comprehension is having square brackets that contain an expression followed by the for loop. This can optionally be followed by 0 or more for or if clauses. Here's an example. So here we have a sequence 1, 2, 3. This is a list. Notice the square braces. To create a new list using a list comprehension, you use this one-liner here. X for X in sequence. So what this is going to do is it's going to create a new list iterating over this list. This is a list here, a sequence. So X for X, and you print it out, and you'll see that the new list is now equal to sequence, basically. This is equivalent to the following for loop. Sequence equals 1, 2, 3, new list equals empty list. For X in new sequence, new list dot append, and then you have the new list. So basically, what you see here, I could quit doing that. All right, let's go back. So this here, X for X in sequence, is equivalent to this big mess right here. It basically shortens things up. Depending on how complex your list comprehension is, it could be better and easier to read to just do the for loop. Okay, anyway, usually when you use a list comprehension, you want to do something to each of the items in the sequence. For example, let's try doubling each of the items. So here we have our sequence again. Now in this one, we're going to do X times 2 for each item in the sequence. Now when we run this, the new list contains 2, 4, and 6 instead of 1, 2, and 3. Another popular thing to do with list comprehensions is to filter a sequence. So if you add an if statement to a list comprehension, it acts as a type of filter. Python comes with the built-in range function that takes in an integer. It then returns an iterable range object that allows you to get a range of integers starting at 0 and ending at the integer you passed in minus 1. Here's what it looks like. So if you run this, you get a range object, 0 through 10. If you convert the range into a list, you'll see it goes 0 through 9. So 0 to 10 minus 1, or 9. You can use Python's list function to turn the range object into a list. Let's say that you want to create a list that contains only the odd numbers in that range. You can use a list comprehension with an if statement in it to do that. So let's just extract the odd numbers from this range. X for X in range 10, but only if X modulus 2. What this if statement does here is that it's going to divide X by 2, but it's going to check for a remainder. If the remainder is 0, that's an even number, and we don't want it, basically. Or, I mean, if it's not 0, it's true. So it's 1, basically. So if we run this, oops, let's go back. Let's run this. You'll see that it creates odd numbers, 1, 3, 5, 7, and 9. So what this is doing, X, let's say 1 divided by 2, the remainder is going to be 1. 3 divided by 2, the remainder is going to be 1. 1 maps to true. If you watched my Boolean operator tutorial, you'll know that 1 is true, 0 is false. So, if you divide 2 by 2, the remainder is going to be 0, and so it gets excluded. All right, let's try using nested for loops and a list comprehension. For this exercise, we're going to create a dictionary and transform it into a list of tuples. So here we have a dictionary, 1, 2, and 3, with different values, dog, cat, and python. And then we're going to have this kind of tuple thing going on here. So for each item in the list, number and animal, for number in dictionary, for animal in dictionary values, if my dict number equals animal. Kind of complicated to read. Let's run it and see what we get. So it basically converts my dictionary into a list of tuples where each tuple is the key and value of each of them. You kind of have to examine this really closely to see what it's doing. So we know for each number in my dict and for each animal in my dict.values, but only if dict num equals animal. So it's kind of checking to see if the dictionary number is in the animal. It's kind of hard to read, isn't it? This code creates a tuple of numbered animals for each number in the dictionary and each animal, but it filters it so that it will only create the tuple if the dictionary key equals its value. Here's an equivalent for loop. So we have our dictionary, an empty list, for number in my dictionary, for animal in the values. If my dict num equals animal, append it to the list. We could make this a little bit less confusing by, making my dict. We can make it loop over stuff in a different way so that this wouldn't always be true. The reason it's confusing is that this will almost always be true. Or always be true, I mean. So this if statement doesn't even really need to be there because it's just always going to be true. Because my dict num, 1 is always going to be in this particular list. So anyway, kind of a convoluted example. You can make this more readable in your list comprehension by adding some line breaks to it. So I like to do this whenever my list comprehensions get kind of complicated. So in this case, you have for num in my dict, and then we put the nested for loop on its own line, and then the filter on a separate line. It works the same way. You still end up with the same result when you run the code, but it's a little bit easier to read and sometimes easier to follow if I'd had a better example here. Okay. Not sure why this code looks this way. Here we go. This is easier to read than the one-liner version. List comprehensions are really kind of fun to write, but they can be difficult to debug or reacquaint yourself with when they're complex. Always be sure to give good names to the variables inside of your list comprehensions. If the comprehension gets too complex, it'd probably be better to break it down into smaller pieces. Nested list comprehensions. So, you can nest list comprehensions inside of each other. For the most part, I don't recommend this. If you search the internet, you will find that the most common use case for nesting list comprehensions is for matrix math. A matrix is usually represented as a list of lists where the internal lists contain integers or floats. We'll go ahead and look at an example. So here we go. We have a list of lists. Each list has 3 items in it, 987, 654, and 321. Inside of our list comprehension, we have another list comprehension. So here is 1 element times 2 for element in row, for row in matrix. If we run this code, you can see that it basically doubles the items in each of the lists. So you get 18, 16, 14, 12, 10, 8, and you notice that it's a list of lists as the output. So we got 3 in there, outer portion of this comprehension. You loop over each row of the matrix itself. I would recommend, if you get the chance, to go look at Python's documentation on list comprehensions. It has several other really interesting examples in it that are well worth your time to check out. All right, moving on. Let's learn about dictionary comprehensions. Dictionary comprehensions were originally created in Python 3.0, but they were then backported to Python 2.7. You can read all about them in PEP 274 if you'd like to. The syntax for a dictionary comprehension is actually quite similar to a list comprehension. Instead of square braces, you use curly braces. Inside of the braces, you have key value expressions followed by the for loop, which can itself be followed by additional if and for clauses, just like you learned with the list comprehension. Let's go ahead and take a look at an example. So here we have key value for key value in enumerate ABCD. If we run this code, you can kind of get an idea of what it's doing. So enumerate returns the position of the number as it iterates, or the item in the sequence as it iterates over it. So A maps to 0, B maps to 1, etc. So when you do this, that means that key is going to become 0 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 as you iterate over the string. So here you're creating the dictionary key value pairs. And as you can see, we successfully created a dictionary with the numbers mapping to the letters. You probably won't see dictionary comprehensions anywhere near as often as you would a list comprehension. They really just aren't as useful, in my opinion, but they are really handy when you need them. You also have to be careful when you create a dictionary comprehension, as the keys have to be immutable. If they aren't, you'll receive an exception. So, numbers are immutable in this case, but if you try to enumerate over a dictionary of dictionaries, you'd probably end up with a problem. All right. Anyway, list comprehensions. Just so you know, immutable means you can't change the keys. The keys cannot be changeable. So you can have a dictionary as the key of a dictionary, it just wouldn't work because it's mutable. And you can have a list as a key in a dictionary. Anyway, let's move on to set comprehensions. So sets were learned about back in chapter 8 of my book, Python 101, second edition. There's also a tutorial on YouTube for sets that you could check out if you wanted to. They're useful for creating sequences that contain a unique group of elements. In other words, they never contain duplicates. Another way that you can create a set is using a set comprehension rather than the set keyword. To create a set comprehension, you're going to be using the curly braces and a loop over a sequence. In a lot of ways, it matches the list comprehension, except that the set comprehensions use the curly braces instead of square braces. So here's a list. You can see it has multiple A's and B's in it. So it's got duplicates basically. So what we're going to do is we're going to loop over that list, but we're going to put it into curly braces, which creates a set instead of a list. When you run this, it will automatically remove all the duplicates. So now we just have 1A, 1B, 1C, 1D, and 1E. And this is a list. You notice there are no key value pairs, even though we used curly braces, because we didn't do the item : value. So you just created a set using a set comprehension. All right, set comprehensions are pretty straightforward. Loop over each item in the list, put it into the set, and the set will dedupe it for you. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments. Otherwise, we're done for the day, and I'll see you next time.